Hello and welcome back everyone, my name is Ron and today we're going to be doing a new tier list in Deep Rock. We have new grenades to talk about, so we might as well be going over all the grenades once again and ranking them. So right now, as you can kind of see, I have the usual tier setup, but I don't have a D tier because I don't think any of these grenades really are D tier. I think they're at least all pretty usable in their own ways. We might need to change this list up a little bit because first up we're going to be talking about Driller. And yeah, we're going to need a new tier for the axes. Let's just have that tier up there and put the axes right up there. This is going to make things a little bit easier as we go on because the axes are still probably the best throwable in the game. They are incredibly good. I would probably want to take them on every class if I could, because of just how useful they are. They synergize very well with certain perks, mainly Vampire. Vampire, you can get health back from these because they do count as melee. They're the only melee throwable grenade in the game. They are probably the best grenade in the entire game, so I guess it's fitting to start out with them. You get 8 of them, which is great. You can retrieve them if you don't kill things with them, which is very useful, and you can kind of exploit this in a couple different ways. You can throw this through webs, and you'll clear webs with it. You can throw it at Ebo Nuts and break them with a single hit, and then play a little game of catching the axe. That's always fun. You can clear up mushrooms in the fungus bog with them. That's very useful. You can use them to clear up electric crystals as well. You can also use them to kind of under damage enemies because they do 2 different damage types. So you can reuse them if you kill an enemy that's at very low health and usually go pick them back up. All of that combined with you having 8 of them and them doing really high single target damage as well as they're on drillers. So status effects synergize very well with high single target damage like freezing enemies. They definitely belong up in the king tier up here, which I'm just going to put them up there so we don't have to talk about them anymore. Otherwise, they're just going to reign over everything in S tier, so they might as well have their own tier. Up next, we have the high explosive grenades, which are Driller's second grenade that's unlockable. And these used to be not necessarily a joke, but not very effective. They're just kind of the standard grenades, and they still kind of are. They did get buffed in this most recent patch, though, which is great. They now have a cooking time, so you can actually see the timer on the side of it, so you can throw them and better hit enemies without them bouncing around like they used to, because before you could hold them as long as you want, and they always had the same fuse time. I do like that that was added. They also have more explosion damage, I believe a larger explosion radius, and more damage within the explosion radius itself, so further damage drop-off. All of that has helped them quite a bit, and I do like them in the new season. However, they are still one of the most basic grenades in the game, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. They're good for softening up crowds. Driller's primaries kind of already do this, but hey, it's any improvement to the HE grenades is great. They're still probably going to go on to C tier. They're kind of just an average grenade. Again, not a bad thing, and they are rather fun now with the fuse time on them. I wish they got some other additional buff, maybe so you could carry 2 or 4 more of them. I think that'd be kind of cool. Or maybe to where they did some sort of ground damage, not nearly as much as like C4, but something like that just to make them a little bit more unique and stand out. Up next is the Neurotoxin grenades, at least I hope that's what this is, because the icon for this one and Pheromones always throws me off. If it's not, then these should be switched around, but we're going to talk about this like it is Neurotoxin grenades. Neurotoxin grenades are pretty interesting. They have somewhat of a downside that you can obscure yourself and other people's screen just because they put out such a thick cloud of the Neurotoxin. Neurotoxin is pretty good for clearing up smaller enemies because it only needs to take a couple of times to kill them. Even on grunts, it kills them pretty quick on the higher difficulties. And it has 2 other unique features. One is the slowdown from the Neurotoxin, which is great. You can stack this with multiple slowdowns. So if you want to stack this with the Sludge Pump or with Persistent Plasma or with both, you can, and that's pretty effective if you want to have a massive slowdown area. You can also blow these up and light everything on fire in a particular area, which can also synergize really well with something like the Sludge Pump, because if you light all the sludge on fire, then you have a big area that is covered with things getting damaged from the fire, slowed down and corroded, and also taking some neurotoxin damage as well. So they synergize fairly well with a lot of things. They're not really one of my go-tos, but they're all around a pretty decent grenade, so I think I'd put them into B tier, maybe into A tier. And then we have our new grenade for Driller, which is the Rippers. The lawnmower, the blade grenade, this thing. It actually has just been fixed today, so it no longer does the incredibly high amount of friendly fire damage it used to, which is great because it used to do 110% friendly fire damage and could 2-shot anybody besides Gunner, because for some reason these count as explosive damage, so Gunner has resistance towards them. Very odd, but at least now that won't be such an issue. And these things are really, really cool to watch. They're also really good if you can put them in any sort of small tunnel area. They're really good then. So they excel on escort missions. They can also excel on some of the other missions like pipeline missions. They're just like a lot of fun to use. I kind of wish they synergized well with Vampire because it would be kind of fun to have a grenade that just gives you burst healing rather than like the steady healing that the axes do. But overall, they're pretty good. And I imagine now with the new changes for the friendly fire damage, it's not going to be as big a deal to get hit by these. Sure, you'll still get downed by them every once in a while, but that happens with plenty of other grenades. They are kind of finicky, so you do have to be a bit careful with these. And I'm by no means an expert with this weapon. Not even close. It still feels very strange to me. I think a safe spot for them is still probably high up into B tier. They're pretty decent. I could see myself taking them, especially on escort missions. Then I would say they're a couple ranks higher than that. Maybe up into A tier, as well as if the terrain is really good, then they're also higher up. In huge open maps, they're not nearly as useful. They can still be used because they'll clear up crowds, but small enclosed areas is where they excel at, kind of like Driller. Up next, we have Gunner's Grenades, and Gunners are generally the most straightforward grenades, the new one being somewhat of an exception to that. So first up, we have the Sticky Grenade. This is the one that you start out unlocking. This one's straightforward. It's your Plasma Grenade, Semtex, whatever you want to call it, depending on what other games you've played. You chuck it at something, it hits, it sticks to it, and then it blows up, dealing damage to it. It also fears enemies that this sticks to, so they'll try to run away from it. That can be a good and a bad thing. Sometimes if they get feared, they'll run directly towards you and you'll take some of the damage, or towards an ally and they'll take some of the damage. You can also stick this to allies, which is kind of terrifying when that happens, but you do get 6 of them, which is pretty awesome. I should have said that you get 6 of the saw blades too, and you get 4 of the neurotoxin. I don't think I went over them. So the amount of grenades you get does matter with this, but sticky grenades are a pretty standard grenade, and if you like them from other games, you'll probably like them in Deep Rock. They're pretty decent on every build, but they're nothing super exceptional either, so I think I'm going to put them into B tier. Still a solid grenade overall. Incendiary grenades are just Molotovs from every other game, so if you like Molotovs, you'll probably like them here, and Molotovs synergize very well with a lot of things in this game. Mainly with volatile bullets on the revolver, so you can do massive damage if you want to do that. You could also support somebody if they have a sludge pump, because you can light all that on fire, and it's very good against the robots. You throw this anywhere near like the turret robots, and you'll probably kill them just because the fire is going to tick down on them and they'll explode. You can also kill Nemesis with these very well too. It depends on the terrain. He still has to be kind of low to the ground so that the fire is still touching him to build up the heat, but they can be really useful if you can get in those few positions. Overall, they're just a pretty solid grenade, and they don't do that much friendly fire either, because most people tend to get out of the fire if they realize they're taking damage from it. So I'm going to put these ones up into A tier. I think they're a solid grenade overall. Clusters are one of the more dangerous grenades to be using. There's actually a couple dangerous grenades now with this new update. Saw blades, clusters, Leadburster, occasionally plasma bursters. These grenades can all cause friendly fire damage, and the clusters are pretty good at dealing friendly fire damage. When you throw this out, it spits out a bouquet of grenades. These go in kind of a flower shape and explode all the way around. It's mostly useful for breaking up crowds, although you can throw this directly underneath something big like a Praetorian and still do pretty good against it. Each of the explosions deals a decent amount of damage. You don't have a whole ton of cluster grenades. I believe you have 4 cluster grenades. Pretty sure it's 4 grenades. I think it's 4 grenades for all of them except for stickies where you get 6. Grenades are affected by the low gravity on certain missions. Clusters are probably one of the biggest exceptions to that, where they want to fly out further, which makes them less consistent on those type of missions, so I don't really like taking them there, but on other missions they can do okay. Overall, I find them to be kind of a decent grenade. They're definitely a flashy grenade and very fun to use, but I think like a low B tier, high C tier grenade overall. I think they're still okay. Then we have the new Leadburster grenade. This is probably one of the most finicky grenades in the game. It might be the most finicky grenade in the game. When you throw this out, it's just going to fire bullets all the way around it. Shoots something like 576 rounds in every direction around it. Although, oddly enough, if you stand on top of it, a lot of the time you don't take damage. I don't know why that is, and it also seems to depend on the terrain. This grenade might be my favorite out of the new grenades, but it does still have some pretty glaring issues. One is that it's pretty easy to do a lot of friendly fire damage with, especially if you end up throwing this right next to somebody, because they can get hit with so many bullets. They also aren't very consistent. Sometimes they'll clear up an entire horde by themselves. Other times you throw it down and they'll kill 1 to 2 grunts inside of the horde, and maybe just hit 1 bullet on everything else, which is still okay. You're still getting a little bit of value that way, but it's not as efficient as maybe just throwing an incendiary grenade there, just having them all walk through. You'll be doing more consistent damage then. It'll be less friendly fire damage. So I still think something like incendiaries are a bit better than this, and I think I'm going to put this one into C tier as well. Even though I did say it was my favorite out of the new grenades, it's probably the most finicky and the most unreliable, so it can go either direction. There is one other problem with this grenade, and that is when you chuck it, if it hits a bug or just hits anything besides just a surface, it usually bounces and then sits in the air and kind of tumbles down. Sometimes you throw it and it hits and it falls down into like one crevice there and does nothing. Other times it hits and gets into a better position, and sometimes it hits and then just comes right back and ends up killing you. So, very finicky grenade, but very fun grenade. Probably my favorite of the new grenades. All right, then we move on to the Scouts grenades. And first up, we got IFGs. IFGs are fantastic. You get 6 of these. You throw these down. They don't do any damage to anything. You can't hurt yourself with them. You can't hurt bugs with them. Well, you can, because they'll help you hurt bugs. But then they put up a field around them that slows all bugs that walk through them. It also applies the electricity status effect to them. So anything that gets extra damage from a status effect, like Bolts of Mercy or the Zukovs or Stubby, Shard Diffractor as well. Those all synergize really well with the IFG, as well as the IFG gives you an additional 30% more damage on top of that. So it's really good for taking on Dreadnought missions, or if you just want to deal high amounts of damage. Like I said, it synergizes really well with the Zukov, so if you want them for crowd control, it can work there, or if you want it for high single target damage, it can also work. They are just a overall very good grenade. I like them a lot. I would probably put the IFG up into S tier. And talking about one of the best grenades in the game, we have Cryos. Cryos are also going to go up into S tier. They are very useful. You only get 4 of them, which I think is fair for what they do. You throw this out and it freezes everything around it, or it applies a high amount of cold to everything around it. It won't freeze things like bulk detonators, at least with 1 of them. You can freeze them with 2. I think you can freeze basically everything that can be frozen with 2. So as long as you throw them in quick succession, if you take your time, then the cooling will go down and it won't be as effective. But they're great for clearing up hordes, because anything that's frozen is taking bonus damage and it can't be attacking you. Very nice. If you freeze any flying enemies, it just flat out kills them, which is great. So if you have Mactera missions, or if you have something like a breeder, just throw this up there and you'll kill it. And they can also be very useful for getting reses, although pretty much all of Scouts grenades can be really good for resing people, because all of them give you something in that regard. Pheromones are another pretty decent grenade. They are potentially not as useful as the other 2 that we talked about. You only get 4 of these. I wish you got a little bit more of them, but they do give you a big cloud of pheromone gas that will hit all bugs in the area, and then all bugs will start trying to attack one another, at least if there is any bugs to attack one another. That is pretty useful. That is still extra value. It's great for crowd control, and it's great for reses once again, because if everything's attacking each other, they're not attacking you, or not attacking friendlies. All of that is very good, as well as we did get more of these, which is great, because I think you used to only be able to hold 2 of them, which made them just not that great of a grenade overall. I think I'd put the Pheromones up into B tier. They're a very straightforward grenade and they're still good, but maybe not as useful as the other 2 that we talked about. Then we've got the Boomerang, or the Stun Sweeper, where we get 8 of these, which is pretty awesome. You throw this out. If you throw it and there's nothing around, it'll come right back to you, so you can't accidentally fat finger your grenade button, which is great. You can't really say that about a whole lot of other grenades, but if you throw this out and there's no enemies nearby, it'll just come right back to you, like a good Boomerang should. And this has an auto-locking feature, so you just have to throw it in the general direction of enemies and it will seek them out. Once you throw it in that general area, it'll do a little bit of damage. When it hits something, it'll apply the electric status effect, and it can bounce up to 9 times. Every time it hits something, it stuns them for 8.5 seconds, with a few exceptions, like enemies that have passive stun resistance, so Praetorians it'll be a bit shorter. I also found just the other day that this works really well against the Tyrant Weed's tentacles. You can just kind of stun lock them in place with the Boomerang. Well, you just clear them up with whatever other weapon. So that's really nice. That's actually a nice bonus to them. Again, stunning a lot of enemies is great for reses. If you're going for reses, there's probably not going to be more than 9 enemies on a particular person, at least assuming there isn't a giant crowd in the area. But at that point, most grenades wouldn't help you too much. They're kind of useful, but they don't do tons of damage. I do really like them, though. They synergize fairly well with Scouts, primaries, and secondaries. I'm still probably going to put them into C tier. I think they're kind of an average grenade. It'd be kind of nice if they got a little bit of a buff. Maybe that to where they could bounce to a little bit more enemies, or to where they could do a little bit more damage, because they are just kind of useful for throwing and clearing up swarmers, or clearing up jellyfish, or exploders. Up next, we've got Inji's grenades. First up, we got the Lures. Lures are fantastic. You throw it out, and bugs try to swarm around and hit it, and once it dies, it actually does a little bit of damage to everything around it. That doesn't really matter that much, except for kind of stunning or slowing enemies. It doesn't really stun them. It just puts the electricity status effect on them, so they take a little bit of damage. It's good for clearing up any swarmers or jellyfish, though. But these are great. They can force all your enemies to go to a particular area, which NG has a lot of ways of hurting enemies that go to a particular area. If you shoot a nuke and you throw these in it, then everything has to climb in the radiation hole. Lures are also useful because they work on Nemesis. You throw them out and Nemesis will try to grab them if there's nobody else closer to the decoys. So if you throw out 2 of these and Nemesis grabs both of them, he'll be at least momentarily unable to grab anybody else. That is very useful. And you get 6 of them, so you can toss them out. You also don't have to worry about damaging yourself. I'm going to put lures up into A tier. They are very solid. Next up, we have Plasma Bursters. These are NG's kind of most offensive grenade. The way the Plasma Bursters work, you toss it out, it hits the ground, deals damage, and then bounces, and deals damage every time that it bounces. The bounce is both a good thing and a bad thing. It depends on the terrain that you're fighting in. Sometimes if you throw this out, it'll just bounce right back to you and hurt you a lot, or it will bounce after a friend and hurt them a lot. Other times it'll bounce exactly where you want it to go, and it'll clear up an entire crowd. So they're kind of inconsistent, they're kind of finicky, but they are pretty good. You get 6 of them, and they work really well in like escort missions when you just want to clear up a whole bunch of bugs in one particular area. Plasma Bursters, probably up into A tier. They're a solid grenade overall. Proxy Mines are another pretty good grenade. You throw these out, and then they take a second arm. Once they arm, you see a big yellow circle in the area. When any enemy walks across that, it triggers and will blow up. It can blow up multiple times, dealing damage to that enemy and all enemies within the circle, as well as all friends within the circle. Don't put these on objectives. I've seen some people do that by accident. Some people that were kind of newer to the game do it thinking that it was a great idea to throw a bunch of these proxies on, say, like a black box, and then watch them explode to their own grenades. So that's not a good use of them. Be sure to put them outside of objectives. They're really good there. Although you can cluster them in one particular area on Dreadnought missions, have the Dreadnought walk through and just have them explode multiple times. You'll do a lot of damage that way. Or if you want to create just a dedicated kill zone where everything's walking through and taking a lot of damage there. Also, this is one of the few grenades that if you throw out by accident, again, you fat figure it, you can go pick these up, assuming that they don't explode. If they explode just once, then you can't pick them up. You do only get 4 of these, so you do have to be a little bit more tactical about them, but they are a pretty good grenade overall. I'd put them up into A tier or B tier. Solid all the way around. And then our last grenade, even though there's 2 of them here, I was doing size comparisons to see what size I needed to put these on here. Anyway, this is the SSG. This is NG's new grenade. You throw this out, it spawns a bunch of shredder drones. Shredder drones go out and murder anything in the nearby zone. If there's nothing for them to murder, they won't just hang around there. They will go to the nearest dwarf. This could be you or friendlies, because I have seen them follow people around a couple of times, and they'll just swarm and smack stuff. They do last for a certain amount of time, so you have them up until there. It doesn't matter how many times they hit enemies or how many enemies are in an area. They don't have a set amount of things that they can hit. They can just keep swarming until they run out of time, and then they all just die. You can also slap these, which is kind of funny. I think it's the only real grenade interaction that you can kind of do with the grenades. They're a pretty solid grenade. Since they're just a passive grenade, you can't hurt yourself with them. They're kind of like an alternative to the Plasma Bursters, and I find them pretty useful like the Plasma Bursters. Plasma Bursters will get you more burst damage and can potentially get you more crowd control. These will do a little bit more single target damage, at least if they're just swarming one thing, and they are far less dangerous to use because even if you throw this out, it is right underneath you. It doesn't really matter. So the Swarmer drones, I think, are honestly the best grenade that we got out of the new grenades, and I'm going to put them up into A tier. So I think this is where I'd put all of the grenades as of right now. I've gotten to try them all quite a bit since the experimental and the new season, which is really awesome. We'll be out in a little bit for console players, so give these ones a try, see how you like them. They're all very fun. Thanks for watching this. Tell me your thoughts on the new grenades down in the comments below. I'd love to hear them. Thanks to all the supporters of this channel. These are my members over here on YouTube, patrons over on Patreon. They get early access to videos just like this, and if you'd like to be a part of it, you can. There's links in the description. Thank you, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye!